Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. Welcome to today's episode where I am talking about the top strength training mistakes that I see runners making. And of course, how you can fix them. So if you are new to the podcast, then welcome. If this is your first episode, then you may not know this about me. But in addition to being a dietitian, I'm also a certified personal trainer and have been for over a decade now. And this is a really big part of the reason why I'm so passionate about strength training for runners, because, my background as a personal trainer, I spent a lot of years teaching people about fitness and teaching people about strength training, primarily proper form, coaching them through the right exercises and, really working on building strength and building function. So part of the reason that I'm so excited about strength training for runners and so passionate about it is, just because I spent so many years doing it, but then also there's the fact that there are so many benefits to strength training for runners that I think are just so underutilized by a lot of us. And so today I want to highlight a couple of the most common mistakes that I see runners making with their strength training and share a little bit of insight into what's probably going wrong. What are some of the reasons behind these mistakes being made? What are some of the reasons why we see this being detrimental to your running or your performance? And then, of course, I'll be sharing my solutions or my thoughts on how we can correct some of these missteps. And, these are the primary strength training mistakes that I see getting in the way of people's results or sort of seeing the benefits and reaching kind of the full potential in terms of benefits that you can get from strength training. And I think that's what keeps a lot of runners maybe stuck or maybe not really believing in the value of strength training or seeing the value of strength training. So today, I hope to change your mind a little bit if you're on the fence about strength training, or if you have been doing it, but maybe not really seeing benefits, you're not really sure if it's even right for you. We will be getting into all of that today. And then if you want a little bit of extra help with your strength training as a runner, if you're feeling a little bit lost or maybe confused in terms of like what you should do and how you should go about your strength training, stick around till the end of this episode because I have a new resource that I will share with you that will help set you on the right path and give you a little bit of direction. Are waiting until they get hurt or they need to do strength training. They'll do their strength training, they'll do their rehab until their injury improves enough that they can go back to running, and then they kind of let it fall by the wayside. So they have these chronic injuries or chronic issues that are consistently or just regularly stopping them from being able to run as much as they want to. They're starting to get pain or discomfort or whatever when they're running. And so when it gets to be too much, they stop running, they go see their physio, they get some exercises. Maybe it's the same exercises their physio has been telling them to do for years and years now. They do those for a little while. They go do some more strength training because they have to fill the time when they can't run. And then as soon as they're back to running, they're back off the strength training and then the cycle continues. So the injury never really gets better to the point that we're preventing future recurrences of that injury. But then also the strength training consistency just isn't there. So every time we go back to it, we're starting from scratch or starting from square one all over again. And so, of course, that's a major issue is that we're just not incorporating the strength training consistently enough to see the benefits in terms of injury prevention or sort of see what it can do for us in terms of injury prevention over time, and to allow the strength training to really completely rehabilitate an injury to the point where it's no longer popping up again and again and again. There's a lot of us and myself included, coaches and people who work a lot with runners that we always promote not being afraid to lift heavy. I mean, I say that all the time to people. Don't be afraid to lift heavy. You have to work to give your body that progressive overload and stress your muscles and, really work them in order to get stronger. But there's that tipping point where the amount or the intensity of the strength training that we're doing starts to compete with the running. And something to keep in mind is that we always want the strength training to be a complement to our running as runners, as opposed to being something that's competing with our running. And so, what we can see is that we actually can get really good results in terms of building strength, building muscle, things like that, from doing not 100% all out effort every single time we do a strength training workout. And throughout the year, depending on where you're at with your race training cycles, whether you're in a race training phase or a base building phase, there are going to be differences in terms of how much strength training you incorporate and maybe how intense those workouts are. So if the problem for you is that every time you try to do some strength training, you maybe go to the gym or do a workout at home or attend a class, maybe you are so sore the next day that you can barely run, or you're sore for days afterwards. It takes you so long to recover from these strength training sessions that you can't do them consistently because it's too much to add that load on top of your running. Then what we really want to think about is maybe cutting back on the intensity, cutting back on how hard or how heavy we're going with these so that we're not so sore that we can't then run the next day. And the great thing is that being more consistent with your strength training over time means that it won't be as much of a shock to your system. It won't be as difficult for you to continue with it. And then you aren't going to be as sore long term. So that soreness and sort of the newness of the strength training goes away with consistency, but it's getting going in the first place and sort of building up that strength in the first place. That's part of the process. As well, if you have been strength training for a while, but you are always sore, really sore after every workout, and you've been strength training for years, and that's just always the case for you, that you're always dealing with a lot of muscle soreness, then that can often be a sign that maybe there's something with your nutrition or with your other recovery strategies that needs to be looked at. So if that's you, and maybe you are very consistent with your strength training, but you're always struggling with a lot of excess soreness, or on the flip side, it's stopping you from being consistent, then looking at your nutrition is something that would be a really good idea. So that's the first mistake, is just really the inconsistency that we can see with strength training. And for so many runners, it's this inconsistency that leads them to not see the benefits or not really reach their full potential in regard to what strength training can do for them. And so the second big mistake that I see a lot of runners making with their strength training is that they're never changing up their workouts. They're always doing the same workout week after week, month after month, year after year. They're never really doing anything differently. They're maybe following the same exercise program or set of exercises they got from a personal trainer or a physiotherapist or athletic therapist years ago, and it's just sort of been the same ever since then. And not that those exercises are bad or wrong, but we want to make sure that with our strength training, we're not just doing things on autopilot. So that means that we don't want to be following the same exercises in the same order, using the same weights or same resistance, same reps, same number of sets, where we can really just kind of do the strength training mindlessly, right? We just sort of go to the gym or maybe go to our exercise space in our house. We kind of spend the 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatever it is on the weight training. But because we've been just doing the same things for so long, it doesn't really make a difference with our running. So we're doing it, we're putting in the work, but we're not really seeing any benefits. We're maybe seeing some injuries kind of again pop up at the same threshold, the same load with our running, or maybe we're not really seeing improvements or changes in our body composition. We're maybe not really getting any faster or stronger with our running despite doing the strength training and kind of putting in the time. And so that's something that I would really encourage you to look at if that's been the case for you or that's been your story. And so the key here with strength training, and it's actually the same with our running as well, the key is that we want to always be adding more difficulty or more challenge that our body has to then adapt and overcome so that it gets stronger. And it's sometimes a little bit easier to imagine this from a running perspective, and then we can kind of translate it to a strength training perspective. But think about when you run, when you're working up towards a race, when you're building up your fitness and building up your mileage as a runner, ideally, we are very slowly adding on a little bit more mileage, and then a little bit more mileage, and then a little bit more mileage. And we are requiring our body to adapt to those new demands, that little bit of extra mileage we're adding in each week, that little bit of extra challenge, so that we have to, we're creating an environment where our muscles and our cells and our bodies and everything have to adapt to be able to do that as we build up to that race. And it's the exact same thing with the strength training. If we're always lifting the same weight, the same number of times, the same number of sets, even, in the same order, then we are never challenging our body or challenging our muscles to have to get bigger or to have to get stronger. And what we call this is progressive overload. We want to progressively overload our muscles, progressively add more resistance, more weight to the exercises that we're doing, so that it makes it a little bit harder over time, and just a little bit, right? Like, we don't want to go too much too soon. And then, of course, we increase our risk of injury. Then that's where we see, things like a lot of excess soreness that stops us being able to run properly. There's lots of issues there, but we want to just be adding on a little bit at a time. And we can do this in a number of different ways, which is great, because even if you don't have access to a lot of equipment, if you're kind of limited in terms of maybe the stuff that you have at home, the weights of the dumbbells or things like that you might have at your house, there are lots of ways that we can make an exercise more challenging without it being just about needing to invest in this big home gym or even needing to go to a gym. One of the ways that we can add a little bit of overload, of course, is to increase the number of reps of an exercise that we're doing. So how many times we're doing that movement. So if maybe you always do a set of 10 push-ups and you always stop at 10 no matter what, next time we're going to try going to 12 push-ups, or maybe we're going to see if we can do 13 or 14 push-ups, and just trying to progressively overload the number of repetitions that we're doing. Another way that we can add an extra element or an extra challenge to an exercise is to have a higher number of sets. So if maybe you're always doing 3 sets of each exercise in your workout program, you can add in a 4th set of each exercise into your program. And again, that can add that little bit of additional challenge without necessarily needing to increase the weight. Now, increasing the weight is a great idea. That's another really good way that we can add a little bit more challenge, a little bit of that progressive overload to our workouts. Over time, it might just require you to invest in a little bit more equipment if you exercise at home, which we can just do that slowly over time. So the second big mistake is that you're never changing up your workouts. And so again, you're not reaching the full benefit of strength training. You're not seeing the benefits of strength training. Maybe you're a little bit bored or feeling kind of stagnant or in a rut with your strength training because you just have been doing the same exercises over and over again. So it's time to maybe change it up, do something a little bit fresh and new to keep you interested and invested in the strength training, so that you're not maybe just on autopilot and just getting it done just to do it. The third big mistake that I see a lot of runners making with their strength training is that you're doing strength training workouts that are actually just more cardio. And this is sort of in the area of a lot of like boot camp style classes or HIIT training classes or kickboxing style, kind of cardio kickboxing style classes. Not that there's anything wrong with those classes. I mean, those classes are wonderful. They're a fabulous workout. They definitely have a great role to play, and they are, something to add to just an element of fun and sort of keeping things different and fresh. But sometimes these workouts are not going to give us the same strength training or muscle building benefit as spending time just sort of lifting weights, or maybe we're using resistance bands or body weight exercises or whatever that is. But sometimes we need to slow down a little bit, and sometimes we need to focus more on just the lifting of the weights rather than doing workouts that include a whole bunch of cardio intervals or a lot of like combination exercises. Like if we're doing a lot of plyometrics and burpees and jumping jacks and sprints and things like that within our workout, we are not going to have enough capacity or kind of gas in the tank to be able to lift to the same capacity that we would. If we're doing 100 squats in an hour-long boot camp class, we are not going to be able to increase the weight or increase the amount of weight that we're lifting with those squats because the reps are so high. And when we run, we are doing multiple small movements over and over and over again, right? The steps that we're taking, running is a very, very repetitive motion. And so with our strength training, we want to be challenging our body in a bit of a different way. We want to be loading up our muscles in a different range of motion. We want to be adding, these different characteristics to the work that we're putting in and sort of the ways that we're moving our body. And so if our strength training class is focused on very, very high repetitions, we're doing things for like several minutes at a time sometimes, or, pairing that up with very, very low weights, it's not that there isn't any benefit, but it wouldn't be quite the same or wouldn't be quite as beneficial if we're looking at how that can help with running performance and injury prevention compared to doing kind of a classic, I'll call it, strength training session. Now, a lot of runners can maybe get a little bit worried or sort of anxious about the fact that when you strength train, you'll notice if you use any kind of fitness watches, things that are tracking heart rate and calories burned during your different workouts, a classic sort of strength training workout where you're just lifting weights, you're taking a rest in between your reps, you're lifting fairly heavy, right? You're challenging yourself, you're challenging your muscles, but you're not doing a lot of cardio intervals or kind of jumping around at the same time and trying to get your heart rate up for the duration of that workout. You will notice that your heart rate is not nearly as elevated as it is when you run, and also that your calorie burn during that workout is much lower. And so that can be really difficult for people to kind of overcome mentally. If one of the reasons that we run and the benefits that we like about running is that we get this really big calorie burn from it. And so if the lower calorie burn is making it difficult for you to want to spend time on strength training, like if it feels like a waste of time, or if it feels like it's not giving you any value, or really what's the impact here, if it's not moving the needle on my calorie deficit, then I want you to go back and I want you to listen to episode 1 of this podcast, which is why eat less and move more is keeping you stuck. And so in that episode, I outline why this idea of just trying to create the biggest calorie deficit possible and just eat less and move more for weight loss as runners is not a great strategy. And it's a strategy that can really get us into a lot of trouble, and how instead we want to be thinking about maybe a very, very small calorie deficit possibly, but we want to really be focusing on eating enough to fuel our training, timing our meals around our training, and doing things that help to improve body composition. A big one of those things, of course, is strength training, because the only way for us to build more muscle and increase the amount of muscle we have on our bodies is by forcing our bodies to get bigger, or muscles to get bigger and stronger with strength training. So these high intensity workouts, these sort of HIIT style or boot camp style class workouts, there's a lot of value, but because we're not building muscle as efficiently, in the long run, it's something that we don't want to be doing too often, especially if we're already doing a lot of running volume, we're already doing a lot of mileage. So sometimes we have to really look at our weekly training schedule and kind of filter out, when are we doing the higher intensity workouts? When are we doing the higher intensity minutes, and how much are we doing there? And then during certain phases of your training cycle, you may not have as much space for the high intensity types of strength training classes, right? If you're in a race training cycle, it may be more beneficial to focus on the running for the cardio and for the, aerobic training or the threshold or VO2 max training that you're doing, and then spend the time on the strength training just focusing on the strength training. When you're in maybe a base building phase or in between race training cycles, you're in a little bit of an off season, that's when you might want to pick up more like some of the higher intensity classes, do a little bit of those boot camp style workouts that have the cardio intervals and stuff like that in there, because then you're going to be getting the benefits of the higher intensity workouts, but it's not competing with everything else that we have going on here. We're much more likely to get injured. We're much more likely to wind up in an underfueling or low energy availability situation if we are doing too much high intensity work and we're not really laying down that foundation for strong muscles, strong joints, strong connective tissues. So that's our third major mistake that I see some runners making with their strength training, is that their strength workouts are actually really just more cardio. And so instead, what we want to do is focus on heavier weights. Again, not so heavy, not so difficult that we are super, super sore and, can't really perform our other duties, because that's not what we want to get into, but focusing on higher weights, lower reps, and ensuring that we're getting enough downtime in between these workouts for our bodies to adequately recover and repair so we can actually get stronger. Because what I want you to remember is that it's the time in between our workouts that we build strength and we build muscle. It's the recovery phase in between the training that we do that is where we actually see those adaptations happen. It's not when we're doing the workout, right? It's not when we're doing the training that we are building muscle. It's in between, when we're resting, when we're sleeping, when we're eating, that we're getting the benefits of those exercises. So I hope that today I've given you a little bit of insight and guidance around some of the major mistakes that I see runners making with strength training, and most importantly, what we can be doing instead to maybe fix those mistakes, rectify those mistakes. If any of these resonate with you, then I hope that you've got a little bit of an idea of what you can maybe do differently going forward to get the benefits of strength training and really allow strength training to help you reach your full potential as a runner. Now, as I promised at the end of today's episode, I wanted to tell you all a little bit about a new resource that I have for you, which I'm really excited to have been able to put together and bring for you to help you understand strength training in a new way and even get started with strength training and really kind of hit the ground running with your strength training consistency and strategy. So, what I have is a new strength training guide for runners. You can find the link to this new strength training guide for runners in the show notes here. As well, you'll also be able to find the link to the strength training guide for runners on my Instagram. So you can find me at Steph the Runner's Dietitian. And what is in this new strength training guide is not only a guide with some tips and suggestions of, some of the things that I've shared here today around reps and sets and all of that, but I also have it linked to some demo videos that you'll be able to find on YouTube. So you'll be able to just scan the QR code from the training guide or click the link and it will take you to YouTube to show you demonstrations of some of my favorite strength training exercises for runners. So this is, of course, not an exhaustive list of all the strength training exercises that are out there because, of course, there are an unlimited number of different strength training exercises we can do. But I've just kind of pared down the list to a few of my go-to favorites that I believe are most impactful and most valuable for runners who want to just build strength and running speed, running performance, and resilience to injury. So this guide is perfect for runners who are maybe a little bit new to strength training. So if you haven't done a lot of strength training before, then this is a great guide to get you started. Or maybe you have some experience with strength training. Maybe you've been doing it for a little while now, but you're time crunched. So you don't want to waste time when you're strength training doing stuff that maybe doesn't really matter. And so you want a really effective but also efficient plan. So you will be able to find that strength training guide for runners at the show notes here on the podcast, or of course at the link in my profile over on Instagram. And of course, while you're there, I would love to connect with you. So you can follow me on Instagram for more nutrition, training, recovery tips and strategies for runners. And then if you need even more help with your strength training strategy, or you need help with your nutrition and just putting all the pieces together so you can become the best runner you can be, then I would love for you to hear more and join the Fuel Train Recover program. So Fuel Train Recover is my group program where I help runners feel better, run faster, and recover stronger so that they can optimize their performance, they can optimize their body composition, and really develop healthier relationships and healthier habits around food and exercise. So if that sounds like something that you need this year to help you boost your performance, start reaching new heights with your running while also balancing out all of that other background stuff that you want to do, then you can learn more about the Fuel Train Recover program. Again, in the show notes, you will find the link there. Or, of course, you can visit my website. That's www.stephanienatchek.com. All right. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found it helpful as you embark on a new journey here with your strength training as a runner. And we will catch you in the The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.